Welcome back to E Squared Emporium for all things AP Psychology. Today we're going to talk about part two, the cognitive part of development. And this PowerPoint slide is just about Piaget. So cognitive development has to do with thinking, right? Cognition is all mental activities associated with knowing, remembering, thinking, just like our cognitive unit. So now we're talking about cognitive development from babies to adults. So, in the 19th and 20th century, and really throughout most of history, we just thought of children as mini adults, and we thought that they thought just like adults. They were just very small adults. We didn't have special toy stores, we didn't have special books, we didn't have special TV shows or clothes, just used the same version as the adults. We thought that children's brains were just like adult brains, and so there was no reason to do anything different. But what we now know is that kids are very different from adults. They need different items at different stages of development. So we have special toys, we have special clothes, we have special TV shows, we have whole TV networks and whole series of books and parts of the bookstore and parts of the library just for kids now. The fontanelles refer to the soft spots on the baby's brain. These are openings in the skull that usually close around 18 months old. They do two things. One, they allow the passage of such a large head through the birth canal. And two, the brain is going to grow so rapidly between 6 months and 3 years. We have to have a skull that is able to hold all of that increase in volume as we have this cognitive development. This is what it looks like. Neurons at birth, neurons at 3 months, neurons at 15 months. It's a rainforest, right? It starts off really tiny connections and ends up as a rainforest. So as babies mature, the brain forms very quickly and it gets very complex neural networks. And we talked about the more enrichment and the more that the parents interact and speak and read to and play music for the baby, the faster and the more developed the brain will be. And we also talked about how abuse and other things can decrease the neural developments and neural pathways. So from ages 3 to 6, our babies, now children, are going to quickly develop rational planning. The last to develop is going to be the cortex, thinking, memory, and language. And we already discussed in teen brains, this process continues well into puberty and beyond, but the frontal lobe is rewiring until you're 25. So you're going throughout most of your teenage years without your frontal lobe helping you. It's there, but it's rewiring, and it's not always there to answer your questions when you need it. It's decision making and planning and risky behaviors. So let's talk about Jean Piaget. So Piaget is actually Swiss. A lot of your textbooks will say he's Swiss French because he worked in Paris in the French schools with the early introduction of the French IQ test. So they were giving IQ tests to children in Paris, and they noticed that the children were scoring horribly compared to adults. And they said, "What are the bébés très stupides? Like, what is going on here?" So do kids just think differently than adults? Or are the kids really not capable? And he went to set out to find the answer to this. And he did. He found stages of intelligence, stages of IQ development, that children are not less intelligent. They are just different in how they develop. Therefore, they need different things at different stages. So he also talks about schemas. We know what schemas are. We've talked about cognitive schemas. So a schema is a thinking or a cognitive framework that helps us to organize information. And if you go down and look at preschool or kindergarten students and what they're learning, they are learning new words and concepts every day: numbers, colors, vegetables, animals, all the people in the neighborhood, right? Different types of foods. They are developing their schemas. And look at most of the toys that we give them at this stage. It is to develop schemas, like what does the dog say? What does the cow say? So as we adapt our schemas, as we get more and more developed, as we grow and get out of the toddler stage and get into elementary school, we assimilate or we accommodate when we come across new words and new terms. And we've also already covered these in the cognition thinking unit, but now we're going to look at them from Piaget's point of view. So assimilating is to interpret any new experience, and put it into your existing schema. So you come across a new vegetable, you have to put it into your existing schema. You see a cat for the first time and you think it's a dog because it has 4 legs. Dogs have 4 legs, so the cat must just be a different kind of dog. But eventually we learn to accommodate. Accommodate is when we have to actually adapt our understanding of schemas. And now we have to incorporate new information, like all these sea animals. That's a lot of different sea animals, and they belong into a lot of different phylum when it talks about biology. So now we understand that cats and dogs are different. They're not the same. So let's get into Piaget's stages. He has 4 stages that we still talk about today. So Piaget has 4 stages of development. We do have to know them all in order. Sensory motor is 0 to 2 years. Pre-operational is 2 to 7 years. Concrete operational is 7 to 11 years. And then 12 years all the way into adulthood is formal operational. And we're going to look at each one of these one at a time. We do have to remember them in order. So we create mnemonics to help us remember them. You could say silly puppies create fun, or silly Piaget created fun. Or you could say some people can fly. Whichever one of those works for you, or come up with your own. So what happens in sensory motor, birth to 2 years? Well, the babies take in the world through their senses. It's called sensory motor. So think of the sensory motor cortex that we talked about in the brain. So anything coming in through our senses, looking, hearing, touching, tasting, grasping, pretty much everything goes into the baby's mouth like a pacifier, like your hair, like a finger. Everything goes into the baby's mouth, and that's how they sense the world. They have to hear it, touch it, taste it, grasp it. So the baby learns that they can make noise. They learn that they can bang on things and shake things, and they can put food all over their face and smear it all over the place. So shaking a rattle, banging on toys, banging on a high chair. They also develop stranger anxiety. It is normal that all of a sudden at 6 months old, the child becomes afraid of strangers, daycare workers, caregivers. Um, this keeps the baby safe. It allows the baby to attach to the primary parents first. So don't take it personal if you've been babysitting for a long time and all of a sudden the baby is crying when the baby sees you. It's just stranger anxiety, totally normal, lasts for a couple of months. Object permanence is where the child is able to see an object even when an object is out of sight. This is where peekaboo is fun, right? The child is just hysterical because now you're here and now you're not, and now you're here and now you're not. But the child actually believes that when you leave the room, you don't exist any longer. When mommy walks out of the room, mommy doesn't exist any longer. She's gone, completely gone from the quantum universe. She doesn't exist anymore. So this is object permanence. The child has to learn that things stay. The dog walks out of the room, the dog walks back into the room. So here's another example. We're going to look at a bunch of examples in class. The plushy doggy is in sight and the infant wants to touch it. But just by blocking the plushy doggy with a tray, the doggy no longer exists. The doggy is gone. Doggy no longer exists anywhere in the universe. And the baby's no longer interested in trying to find the doggy because the baby doesn't have object permanence yet. They don't understand where the doggy has gone. Egocentrism starts at age 2 and will continue all the way into the next stage that we talk about. Egocentrism, the ego is at the center, right? That's what that really is saying. So children will say, like, if I can't see you, you can't see me when they go to try to play hide and seek and their feet are still sticking out. It is the inability to take on another person's point of view. You say it's all about me, 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 me. And again, we'll talk about a bunch of examples. Moving into the next stage, pre-operational. This starts when the child begins to learn to speak and lasts until about age 7, and a lot happens in pre-operational. Children do not yet understand concrete logic. They cannot yet mentally manipulate information like math. They do increase playing and pretending and imagination. They still have trouble seeing things from other people's point of view until about the age of 8. They have symbolic play. They can manipulate symbols. We'll look at what all this means, but they don't understand the law of conservation yet. Again, that comes in a little bit later. So some of the things that happen in this stage, let's break it down. Pretend play is obvious. We all know what pretend play is. It's make believe, it's imagination play, it's often role play, structured play, but it's fun, it's creative, it's not for survival. The child has a safe setting and they can just practice things and they can practice their fears, they can practice what they really want. The child's using fantasy. So this is actually really good for cognitive capabilities and for social competence and social relations later on. Another form of play that's interesting during this time is parallel play. We see this with toddlers. They're playing, they're in the same room, they may be sitting right next to each other, but they're not playing the same game. Each child is in their own little egocentric world. They're in their own little private world, and they're not actually playing the same game. So they have not yet grasped the rules of how to play games or the social functions of how to play together. If you try to play a formal board game with a toddler at this age, you'll get really frustrated because they just make up their own rules. Imaginary friends are very normal between 2.5 and 5, very, very normal during this time. So again, they still have egocentrism until the age of 8. And this is still the inability to take on another's point of view. It's all about me, 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 me. Animism, think about animal, right? Animism. They outgrow this around age 3, but they go to different stages. We're going to look at the different stages. This is the belief that all inanimate objects, toys and teddy bears, have human feelings. And they may want to save a place at the dinner table for their teddy bear because teddy bear is going to feel left out. And they get very, very upset if you leave their stuffed animal behind because that stuffed animal is alive and it is going to be very lonely without them. And you can't explain to them that that doesn't actually happen. So then later, around 4 to 5 years old, they think everything is alive and has purpose. Then only objects that move have a purpose. And then from 7 to 9, only objects that move spontaneously are alive, but that could be robots, that could be AI, that could be drones. And then 9 to 12, they can really decipher plants and animals are alive and everything else is inanimate. Now, mental symbols starts around age 3 to 4, and this is where the child can use symbols. They can, use a box as a house or a castle, use a stick as a pretend horse. They can also symbolize people's names. They know that grandma represents a particular person, and so when you say grandma, that is a symbol of this particular person. And they understand basic symbols, smiley faces and hearts and, basic symbols. They also start to develop theory of mind. Now, this kind of goes hand in hand with egocentrism. This is an idea about other people's mental and emotional state, not just yours. This is where you can start to tease. You can also start to have empathy. You can also be very persuasive. Children can learn to be quite manipulative when they learn theory of mind. They get into exactly what it is you want to hear, and then they know what to say. But it is the ability to look at other people's feelings, other people's perceptions and thoughts, and maybe predict behavior, to be able to read people. Like you might read them the story of Little Red Riding Hood and say, what's going to happen? And a child with pre-operational theory of mind is able to say, oh my goodness, like, don't go in there. That's so, don't do that, Little Red. That's the wolf. And they're able to see other people's emotional states. This is very difficult for children who are autistic or on the autism spectrum, and it's difficult for children who are deaf. Now remember, we already learned infantile amnesia, but that actually starts here in this stage. Most of us can't really remember past before the age of 5. Before the age of 5, you might have a vague sense of something that happened, but you don't remember all of it. Now your parents can show you pictures, and that can help you keep the memory. And maybe you hear the story over and over and over again, and that can help you. That's because the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain responsible for forming our memories, is not yet fully developed. And during this time, this rapid production of new neurons in childhood, it disrupts existing networks of memories and it will make them inaccessible to us later on. And that's because we have a lot more memories to keep after the age of 5. Between 5 and 80, we have a lot of memories to put in there. So we have to let some of that go during this neural network connection. Now we move into concrete operational 7 to 11. So here, children gain a better understanding of concrete concepts. What do I mean by concrete? I mean exactly what a person says is exactly what you mean. You don't necessarily get sarcasm and reading in between the lines and other things yet, but you can use logic. You can start to use analogies, operational thinking. You can classify. You can start mathematical transformations. You understand conservation. We'll talk about what that is, reversibility, and you will become less egocentric very quickly into this around age 8. So here's an example. If you say to a child, I just had a light bulb moment, right? Like it means you have an idea. An 8-year-old understands what you mean, but the 3-year-old thinks you mean there's literally a light bulb in your brain and somehow they'll look for it. They'll look to see how the light bulb got into your head. So, concrete operational, one of the main laws that we have to learn is conservation. So, children learn that objects can change in appearance and size and volume, but actually remain the same. So, mass, volume, and number, they remain the same even though you've changed the form of the object. And we'll look at lots of examples of this in class. So, again, in pre operational, children don't have this. And children ages 2 to 7, they do not have this ability to figure out that you just poured the same amount of water into a different size glass and it's still the same amount of water. But once they hit the concrete operational stage, they understand this very well. And it starts in that order: number, length, liquid, mass, area, weight, volume. You would not have to know that detail. Reversibility is another thing that comes in with concrete operational. The understanding, usually we use this for math, but things like 5 plus 9, is that the same as 9 plus 5? And then we confuse them with subtraction. Is 9 minus 4 equals 5 the same as 9 minus 5 equals 4? And then you throw in multiplication and division, and it may no longer work any longer. But for a little while, they understand reversibility. They understand that you can reverse two people in a sentence, or you can reverse two numbers, and it will actually still make the same type of sense, the same transformation. Now we move into 12 to adult. So we keep formal operation all the way through. So this is reasoning and being abstract and logic and morals. We'll talk about moral reasoning one day. This begins around 11 or 12. We begin to think abstractly. We can reason hypothetically, like what if? We ask a lot of what ifs, and then we go try the what ifs. We may systematically test solutions, like what happens if I take the DVD player apart? What happens if I take the toaster apart? We understand complex concepts like logic and theory. We start to get more humor. We start to really understand why jokes are funny. It marks the transition from that concrete thinking where we have to have you tell us exactly what it is specifically to now we can read in between the lines. We get innuendo, we get double entendre, we get sarcasm, and more advanced reasoning. And this is definitely using some of the frontal lobe, even though remember, it is rewiring until we're 25. So here's an example. If John is in school, then Mary is in school. John is in school today. So what can we say about Mary? Well, this is a logic problem that says that Mary is in school. So in adolescence, we go through several stages. One is imaginary audience. It feels like you're being watched and judged by others all the time. That's why we don't like to get up and speak in front of the class. We think everyone's watching us, everyone's judging us, and half the time they're not even paying any attention. And a study from Tufts University noticed that kids who got into trouble and risk-taking behavior during this adolescent time period, they were trying to impress a perceived audience that may not even know that they exist. Another thing that we go through is personal fable. Personal fable is a belief that we hold as teenagers that tell us that we are special and unique, and that none of what we see on TV or none of the warnings that adults give us, they don't apply to us. None of those difficulties or problems are actually going to affect us, no matter what our behavior is. Remember, we have a rewiring of the frontal lobe happening during this time. So, not me, I'm special. I'm a vampire and I'm all twinkly in the sunlight. The other things that we see from young teen, and this goes now all the way into adulthood, we start to develop abstract thinking. We can now do algebra, geometry, harder subjects like that. We do hypothetical thinking. We can problem solve and brainstorm and what if even more. And we do systematic thinking, again, getting us ready for college and jobs and beyond. And now you are ready for the next video.